Hey guys, so I've got an endgame lesson for you. You've probably been in this situation before where you are maybe at a slight disadvantage in an endgame, but you feel like you could maybe hold it to a draw. Well, that's exactly the situation that my opponent was in this particular game. And as you can see from the report from chess.com, when I ran it, the game was pretty tight all the way up to one certain point. So there's one key move. So see if you can spot this move, because it's a really instructive lesson. So we'll go through the opening and the middle game fairly quickly so we can get on to that key point and see if you can identify the losing move essentially for black. Okay, so we've got a Sicilian, and I play this slow kind of Grand Prix, which just seems like a contradiction in words, but there we go. Knights come out and bishops, and I castle early, get my queen across, ready to come in and try and attack the king side. Here black looks like preparing to fianchetto the bishop, so I played c3 just to start to block off that dark diagonal. Now I'm looking at actually bringing my knight round. I couldn't find, because clearly for this knight at home here, there's nowhere to go right now, and I wanted to bring it into the party, so I'm actually aiming to maneuver it around the board to some degree. So pawn comes out, and I come back to c2, queen comes there, then I'm thinking of maybe eventually bringing my knight round to here. Okay, so black brings a queen out. There's a danger of a discovered attack by moving the c-pawn, of course, on my king here. But I figure that I've got time to move out of the way of that. So I now play d3. Black develops his g knight, trying to get ready to castle. And now I put my bishop onto e3. So that puts paid to any ideas that black has got of this discovery. Knight comes in to attack the bishop, and I put my queen there on h4. Black captures, and I recapture with the knight. So now this knight is actually undefended. So if the pawn is pushed, I might have to, for example, play d4 to protect it. But my knights now are pretty well positioned to assist with the assault on black's position. Black castles, and I bring my knight in. So I knew that this would force the h-pawn to move. So there's a clear threat of mate in 1. H-pawn has to move forward to h6. Now I retire my knight to h3. The idea is that this then leaves room for my rook to lift off the back rank and to come in and support the assault on black. Okay, pawn moves, come in and kick the queen. Queen moves back, and now I start to push my f-pawn through. Knight comes, captures. So now we've got double pawn situation on the e-file. I capture on g7. Pawn recaptures, queen captures, bishop captures knight, rook captures rook, bishop captures rook. So basically within the space of a few moves, we've found ourselves in an ending. And now I bring my rook across, because I feel like, okay, I'm 150 points higher rated than my opponent. Just evaluating the board, let's see what we've got here. Okay, you start with the pawns. So we've got a pawn island of 2, a 1, and a 3. Okay, on my side, I have a 5, and then a doubled pair, which is like a 1. So it's kind of similar. I am technically a pawn up, although I've got these double pawns, which can negate that advantage. If that gets blocked, then it's 2 pawns that are blocked, for example. But even so, I figure that being maybe more experienced, I ought to be able to outplay my opponent in the endgame, and that is indeed what happens. So black decides that a trade of rooks is in their favour as well. And now we get into the quite deeply tactical world of pawn advances, and we've got these opposite coloured bishops, so it should all be good fun. Okay, so pawn pushes forwards, I push forward to lock off the the c-file here. I'm also thinking I'll play probably b3 at some point, so these pawns will be pretty much stuck. Neither one will be able to advance, or it'll just get captured and maybe give a passed pawn to the opponent. So we have 2 pawns here, and I have these 2 pawns here. They should be able to cancel each other out. And then my bonus pawn is this guy, d3. That's my extra pawn. But a lot of the time what this really comes down to, when you've got these kinds of 2 lines, it's almost like 2 gangs of Vikings just trying to hit each other, or Romans or Scots or whatever you prefer. It can be very difficult to get through. So I think, and if you actually check, well, when I checked the game report at this point, it's saying the game is pretty much drawn. Okay, although I have an extra pawn, the computer says drawn. So this is what black should be thinking about at this point is secure the draw. Right, they're 150 points lower rated. So assuming this is a rated game, I can't remember if it was, but they would stand to gain some rating points from a draw. So 150 points, well, that would probably be like an 11-5 game, something like that. So they get 3 points for a draw. Okay, so they push a5, I push b3. So now we have pretty much a standoff on the A, B and C files, and also this pawn can't advance at any time soon. So first thing that you've got to understand is, where is the action area? Where is the critical point on the board? And it's this gate here, right? So it's almost like a race to occupy that part of the board. Now maybe what I could have thought about doing is maybe try and get my bishop on there to make life difficult. That would have been an idea. So now the kings start to move up the board. Okay, and h5 is played. I move my king across. Bishop moves. Pawn moves to h4. Now I was happy to see that, because it allows me to advance my king, right, to this point where black's king now cannot enter that square. Right? I mean, he couldn't before anyway, because that one's guarded by a pawn and that one's guarded by the bishop, but it just feels like I'm closing down this square. And now, king to h6. Right, and if you've been looking out for the turning point move, this is the turning point move. Okay, let's just figure out why. So, the most powerful pieces on the board at this point in time are the kings. The kings can move in any direction, and basically they've got a lot more scope. The king can move to every square on the board, whereas the bishops can't, and these pawns are all pretty much locked up against each other. So the king's the most important piece on the board. Now if my king can get behind my enemy's line of pawns, it could cause a lot of damage. Similarly, if black's king could get behind my pawn line, it could cause a lot of damage. And you know, some of these pawns are really not far off from promoting to a queen and potentially winning the game. So it's one very, very important general principle in the endgame is to try and centralize your king. Okay. Now sometimes you also have to think about, where are my different groups of pawns, and how can I ensure that I'm not overexposed, I'm not too weak on either side of the board. It can be very difficult, for example, when you've got a group of pawns on one side and a group of pawns right on the other side. Your king can't defend both, so then it's a question of, what other pieces do I have that could maybe help do that. Now very simply, according to the engine, this game was bang drawn at this point. I think I was a quarter of a point in front, but then that's by virtue of having an extra pawn. But even so, we were dead set for a draw. So what black should be thinking about right now is ensure the draw. Okay, what moves have I got? I'm never going to move a3, right? I'm never going to move d4. These pawns can't go anywhere, and these pawns can't go anywhere. So I have no pawn moves. So what am I going to do? I've got my king and I've got my bishop, and there's only so many times that I can move my king and my bishop backwards and forwards, on half the board before we get a draw by repetition. Okay, so all black needed to do really at this point was just move the bishop backwards and forwards like that, really. Okay, so but what black did was this, and that loses the game pretty much on the spot because it allows my king to come in. This pawn seems to have a run for the line, but it can't get in there. As soon as my bishop lands on g4, then my bishop and the pawn are protecting each other, and there's no action then possible. So, and the king, because it's moved to the side of the board, now can't go to this square, can't go to this square, right? So the only way the king can move is away from the action. So that leaves black's bishop the only responsible for protecting all of these pawns. Now, the pawns are on dark squares, and it is a dark squared bishop. However, how is it going to defend both of these pawns from my king? It can't, right? Let's say if the bishop even comes here, I can come there and attack the bishop. Bishop has to move away, and whichever direction it moves in, it can only defend one of these pawns. So when my king comes in here to d5, one of these pawns is going to fall. So let's see how it pans out. Okay, bishop goes there to defend the pawn. Good. I then secure the king side of the board by putting my bishop on g2. There's no g4. There's no rush here. King starts to come in. King tries to come across, but remember, your king has a force field all the way around it. All right? For as long as my king is there, my enemy king cannot approach my king. So I simply move to c5. King comes across again, and I start just eating pawns. Okay, that's it. And at this point, the game is already lost. So my bishop comes back to defend d3. It can't defend it for long, and I know that. Yeah, I could put my bishop back on f1. Then when king comes here, I'm going to have to. It would actually be trapped in that case. So I come in to attack black's bishop in return with a counterattack. At this point, I have 3 extra pawns. Right? Then I escape with my bishop, so I give up the d3 pawn. But now it's too little too late, because my king can come in now, and black simply can't defend everything. So here comes the c pawn, and the king just needs to shepherd that pawn up the board. For some reason, black decided not to capture the pawn and let it queen, but that's really the end of the game, and black is forced to resign. So it all comes down to that one particular move, right? And you need to be very conscious when you're coming into an endgame. Is this an endgame that I have a chance of winning? Or is this something that I am likely to lose or have a chance of drawing? Now, as long as this king stayed put on there, it's guarding these 2 squares. So is my king, right? They are in opposition. They cannot move. They're stuck, right? My bishop cannot get through to do any damage, and as we've already established, my pawns can't go anywhere. So all black needed to do was just hold the line for a little while and wait for a draw, or wait for my clock to run out, right? Sometimes you just have to be pragmatic. So I don't know what black was thinking about trying to achieve with this move, but it wasn't going to work. I mean, even the king can come here and back to there. Just move that a few times. At this point in time, my king actually can't move from this square, because it can't go there or there or there or there. So it's got no places it can move. So really, I've only got a handful of bishop moves, and it would have ended up in repetition, and would absolutely have ended up in a draw had black not tried to make something out of the situation. Sometimes you shouldn't try and make something when you are down in material but facing a very locked board. So there you go, just one move there made the whole difference in the entire game. As we see so often, just hold your nerve, and if a draw is your best result, do what you need to do to get the draw. That's it. Okay, thank you for watching Chess Bootcamp. Please subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and I will see you soon.